Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that snippet from Modern Family. I think that that is one of the best videos to start out Chapter 3. And I love what Gloria says about culture at the end of that clip. I'm a big fan of that show when I have the opportunity to watch it because we'll see it again when we talk about families in a couple of days. So, this is your introduction to culture. It is not what you may traditionally think culture is. Most people in America think that culture is popular culture, and there's actually different levels of culture in societies. Um, the way sociologists view culture is like it's a toolbox, and there's three very important components to that toolbox. One is language. One is the ability to think abstractly, and the other is a way to produce goods or resources. Culture is something that has been around as long as society has been, and it's really fundamental in understanding why we live the way we do. So it really does impact our social development because it teaches us what's right and what's wrong, how to act, how to think sometimes. And when we talk of culture, we talk about symbols. And symbols can be verbal, nonverbal, material, non-material, but they are the things that we look at or we experience every day that remind us what cultural or social groups we belong to. So, language is a symbolic system. It's a system of symbols, and it is composed of three different levels: the verbal, nonverbal, and written. Um, and they simply convey meaning. That is what language does. It is a way for us to say, "Hey, I have an idea. Hey, have you seen this? Hey, let me share this experience with you." Um, and it is really what grounds us in the communities and the different social groups that we operate in. So, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is mentioned in your book, and I wanted to go into depth a little bit more than the book does, because um, these cats back in the 30s decided to figure out how culture was created through language, and we if we look at it graphically, and I'm going to show you that in just a second, it makes much more sense because our language is tied to everything that we do and everything that we see in the world around us. Um, I could go on for hours and hours and hours about what happens to cultures or societies when language is lost. It's a death sentence to those groups because when the language is lost, it is indicative and symbolically, it's an erasure of everything that that group has in its past, the history, its knowledge, and its diversity, and on a global level. And like I say, there's plenty of examples throughout the world, and even here in the United States, where when a language was lost, within 2 or 3 generations, so was the social group. So here's that visual representation of the hypothesis. And the way these guys explain it is first you have to experience something. So let's go back to the caveman for a second. So I'm walking along and I'm like, wow, okay, there's something in front of me and it looks really dangerous. Oh, wow. So now I have to conceptualize it and go, what does this mean? Okay, it looks like it's got 4 legs and a tail. Okay, I'm going to call that a cat, and it's got long teeth. So, okay, saber-toothed tiger. Yeah, okay, there you go, saber-toothed cat. So I want to go tell my peeps about it in the village. So I go and find somebody else, and I say, hey, this is what I saw. This is how I felt. And saber-toothed tiger comes out, right? I take him to it. He sees it. He says, yeah, saber-toothed tiger. And the process starts all over again. Um, what is interesting about this is if we take it to the next level, we'll see that, where it was once, okay, a saber-toothed tiger, now maybe it looks like food if we're hungry. So we look at each other and we go, dinner. Okay, there you go, dinner. And we experience it. So it's a recursive process. It doesn't just stop once it's been verbalized. And we can cite many, many, many examples of where, excuse me, of instances where a word has shifted in its meaning throughout generations. So material culture is all the physical stuff and the artifacts that we create as a society. It's also the stuff that we consume, and it really shapes the way we live. So in our society, in American society, we're very much of a consumer mindset. We want the latest and the greatest. We're willing to stand out in line for hours or days on end to get the newest iPhone. And it is a tool, really, that allows us to interact with the world in a way that is most effective. So cell phones are really an amazing development or device, because before there was telephones or cell phones, you had to stand next to a wall and talk to somebody or find a payphone. So most Americans today own a cell phone. So here you have a piece of material culture that has become embedded over time in the social experience of many. And there's the possibilities are endless. I mean, I could come up with 1,000 examples of material culture, TV shows, music videos, songs, raps, anything that is something that we can take in, either through our senses or physically, is material culture. Non-material culture is all of the abstract stuff, the stuff that we do without even thinking about it. The way we might take off our hat when we go into a restaurant or sit down for dinner. The way if we were in a classroom right now, I would ask you to raise your hands, or I would ask you a question, and you would raise your hand to respond to it. Well, when did that happen? When did you learn to do that? It just is. It's a social convention. It's a behavior that is expressed and understood for anybody that goes through the educational system. And we find that we do that in meetings after we get out of school, or at work, or we may be in a conversation with people of the same faith, and we want to be recognized. So it's this symbol to say, hey, I have something I'd like to say. Please recognize me. And once again, these symbols will be used to let you in or keep you out of specific groups. The two are intermingled. They're two very separate, different types of culture, but they're very much intertwined. Non-material culture attaches the meaning to the objects of material culture. So if I am carrying a cell phone for work and I am using it primarily for work, my non-material culture is when anybody calls me from the hours between 9 and 5, if that's my work day and I can actually stop at 5 and start at 9, then that is the non-material culture that goes along with it. Um, there's lots and lots and lots of different examples. Graffiti is one of my favorite examples when it comes to talking about the relationship. If you live in an area that gets tagged, or if you're familiar with um, the tagging of buildings and things, you'll notice that there's very specific signs that are used by gangs to mark territory. Well, the material culture, the object, is that symbol that they use, or they spray paint it on the wall or the fence or whatever. The non-material piece of that gang symbol is, this is our area. Stay out if you're a rival gang, or it may mean, hey, if you are affiliated with us, this is a safe place to be. So this is not a simple relationship. It can be very complex, and it all is the way we interpret these symbols is very much dependent on where we're situated within the society. Um, Beliefs are the ideas that we agree are true. Many times they are based on faith, superstition, science, tradition, or experience, and they change over time, which is kind of cool. You know, we don't hold the same beliefs that we do maybe a year ago or 5 years ago. Um, and I like the Thomas theorem, and he said that beliefs may be understood as real when they are real in their consequences. And basically, what that means is that I have, if if my belief system says that I need to go to my place of worship at least twice a week, or I'm going to be, in trouble with my higher power, that's a pretty strong reason for me to go to those services. And if I don't, all of a sudden my life kind of crumbles. Things don't start to work out. Well, it's because I have a very strong faith in my religion, and I it sets me up to see all of the consequences for not going to my religious services. Um, yeah, there you go. Norms. Those are the rules that govern how we act in the society in which we operate. Um, if there used to be a time when it was really, really, really bad to have a child out of wedlock. And so you didn't have children until you were married. Well, there was didn't stop people from having children before they were married, but when you do the math, back in the day, you do the math, there may be 5 months between the time a couple was married and they gave birth to a child. That would have been you could say, I'm sorry, that they got married, shotgun wedding, right? They got married because they had to. Today, that's not always the case. Single moms and single fathers are more prevalent in society, and we don't see it as such a stigma anymore. Folkways are the norms that are passed down from the past, and it's not really serious if you break them, right? So if I were to, if somebody said to me, well, if you don't eat, oh, I don't even know. Let's just skip that because I'm getting tired. But folkways are the informal things. A lot of times, they're passed down in families, and there's no real consequence to breaking them. Mores. It's not mores, it's mores. Those are the strongly held norms, and a violation of the norm will be considered a serious breach of the social contract. So, if I'm on BART and I see um, someone not getting up for an elderly person and they're sitting on in the handicapped or elderly section seats, you know, that's not okay with me. I hold a very strong belief that we should respect our elders. So I'm going to say something. I'm going to say, hey, you know what? You need to get up. Well, if the other individuals around me don't feel this as strongly as I do, um, they may say, hey, you don't have any right to ask that person to make room for this older person. But mores are so strongly held norms. They're very, very strong. And in some situations, breaking a more would be would have serious consequences. Taboos are those powerful mores. It's like, man, it's unthinkable. You wouldn't even go there, right? So the example is marrying your first cousin, right? You just don't do that. Another taboo would be marrying your sister or your brother. You just don't do it because it's serious. You know, it's the man. No, don't go there because there's something seriously wrong if you do. Laws are what formalize and institutionalize normative, social normative behavior. So what happens is everybody agrees that, hey, you know what, this this marrying your sister is not a good idea. You know, that is just not socially acceptable. That will lead to a law that says, you know what, you can't marry your sister legally. So the social norms are then codified, and they become a way for society to police the behaviors of the members with serious repercussions if they're broken. Values are the abstract and standard in society that identify an ideal principle. So if we talk about being an American, for instance, if you fly your flag every day outside of your house and you celebrate the 4th of July, in a very traditional way. It's saying, I am a good American. I fly my flag. I celebrate the 4th of July. I believe and defend my country. Those are patriotic values. And that is the ideal, right, for the system. Everybody in power wants you to have a strong patriotic view because it tends to cause less problems if everybody is on board. But on additionally, we also have community values and family values. So there, you go from the large picture of what it is to hold American values down to the local level, and finally within your own house. Because not everybody's standards of behavior or standards of principle are going to be the same across the board. And these values can be cohesive, or they can create great conflict. A good example of when patriotic values took hold, if you are old enough to remember 9/11, there was a strong sense of nationalism when that happened. And everybody came together, everybody was an American, and that was great. You know, we were all in it together. However, as this war and terror went on, and it got further and further along, some Americans didn't believe that we should be doing this. It went against their ideal principles, and so there was a conflict. It became a source of conflict. Get these guys home and these women home. And we can see that in politics. Politics is a really great look at where general standards of society are enacted. And it really, values play a critical role in the social integration of a society. If you look at American society in general, we have a lot of shared values, but we also have values that conflict. And that's actually an American value, is that everybody's allowed to hold their own personal opinions. But if you look at the Amish, for example, and I love that show, Amish Mafia. They took that off the air. I don't know why. Great show. Anyway, the Amish have a very strict value system, very strict social norms, very strict belief system. And when that is violated, you're out, you're gone, you're banished, you're shunned. You're no longer a member of the group. So that that banishment, that shunning, really is designed to get you back into line pretty quickly with the shared values of the group. So ideal culture, real culture. We have the ideal culture, and that says that, you know what, we really want to believe that beauty is only skin deep. But the real culture is something a little different. And we know from various studies that attractiveness is linked to social, economic, and educational advantages. So, a more attractive individual is more likely to be more successful in life than, say, someone that is less than attractive. And so here we have an ideal culture and we have a real culture, and they conflict. That conflict is called cultural inconsistency. And we can see this when we talk about race. We can see it when we talk about ethnicity, language, sexual orientation, all these different ideas that we have, and that we want. We want a world that we can live in, but the world that we actually create is something sometimes very different. Ethnocentrism, you guys have heard this before. It's where we judge what we see by our own standards. So ethnocentrism is probably the hardest thing to get away from. But it's important because as a sociologist, we don't want to be biased. We don't want to say, well, that is not part of my culture, so that's abnormal or unnatural. Culture for a given group is dioxic, meaning that the norms and practices seem to be part of the social order. And it's just the way they are. And a good example of ethnocentrism is when we look at a group and we say, wow, they really shouldn't do that. They, for instance, I'm not sure if I talked about this before, but with female genital mutilation in the African subcontinent, that is something that's highly charged, that we talk about quite a bit and an international global scope. And we say, well, that's really wrong. You shouldn't do that. Yet when we look at male circumcision, it's a very different story because most Western cultures or countries practice circumcision if they are of Judeo-Christian majority. And there are studies that say it's just as traumatic for young men when they reach sexual maturity as it can, or not as traumatic, I'm sorry, but physically it has consequences much like it does for young women. So if we take a non-ethnocentric view, we would look at the reasons why that behavior, why that tradition persists in those countries. Cultural relativism. Give me just one second here. Okay, cultural relativism. It's where we understand the practices of another group of people sociologically in terms of that group's culture. So the example I just gave you, if I looked at that practice and I understand that, realistically, these groups cannot afford to have a lot of children running around. Maybe there's not a lot of resources close by in that area. What would make sense then to control access to women's reproductive um, status, because it's harder to do that with males, and males tend to be in power. So the easiest thing to do is say, okay, young women, you're not going to be sexually active, and we're going to make sure you're not sexually active. Um, and, we as sociologists wouldn't say that was extreme. We would appreciate that and say, okay, I understand that. That's etic. Emic is when someone from that group would um, come out and say, this is what's going on, and explain it. Subcultures. We're all a part of a subculture in America, in any place um, you exist in, you're a member of a subculture. And what that is it is a group that is part of, but differs from the dominant culture. So there's ethnic subculture, which is where you can embrace what it is about, for instance, being an American. You will embrace that. You might embrace some of the holidays that go along with that. But if you are from, say, Afghanistan, um, you would maybe possibly speak Farsi at home, and you would have rituals in the home or in your religious community that were not of the Judeo Christian faith, which is the dominant culture that we live in today. Counterculture, though, is where all those norms and behaviors and practices deviate from the dominant culture. So, an example of a subculture might be, say, skateboarders. They are a very strong group that represents um, the counterculture movement of youth today. There's tons of counterculture movements in the United States, though, and if we have time, maybe I'll have you investigate one or two of them because I think it's an interesting phenomena. Because when we study counterculture, we find that a lot of times it starts out that way as a deviant form of culture, and then rises to become popular culture, as in the case with rap music. Culture and class. High culture is all the stuff that rich people do. So if it's the stuff that not everybody does because it's either expensive or it's just not a part of your everyday existence. Um, the examples here are like Broadway, knowledge of fine wine, and classical music. Um, yeah, okay. I would argue that there's some popular culture in that, but high culture is really the stuff, like I said, that rich people do, and the people that um, are not a part of the masses, the 1%. Popular culture is the entertainment, the food that we eat, the sports teams, movies that we go out and watch. It's all the stuff that's consumed by the masses. So let me go back really quick. Culture reproduces class, okay? And culture can act as a gatekeeper. So this is often used in the argument for standardized testing. Um, that standardized tests assume that everyone comes from a white privileged um, socioeconomic background. Um, and it is classes reproduced through generations. Pierre Bourdieu is a cool guy. I like him a lot. And he talked about how if you're from a working class family, you you learn different things than if you're from, say, a CEO's family. Um, and you learn different values. You learn different ways of working in the world, acting in the world, and interacting with other individuals. You've heard me say this a lot, cultural capital. It is the same thing. Think about capital in the sense of business, right, where there's money. And cultural capital is all of the knowledge of that um, higher culture way of doing things. So, golf is one of my favorite examples to use because golf is seen as being a place where business is done. Executives play golf, bankers play golf, sports athletes, pro athletes play golf, but not everybody is into it, right? It's not like football where you've got a bunch of people screaming and yelling and we're watching it on TV. You don't see Super Bowl parties for the Masters. You know what I'm saying? It's this very different feel to it. Well, what cultural capital does is it tends to be like a gatekeeper, and it keeps the undesirables, quote unquote, out so that they don't their access to the upper social mobility is very limited. And we know that cultural capital has a lot to do with academic achievement. Academic achievement will definitely um, affect your economic wealth and capital, and that leads to class reproduction. This idea that we are born into a social class, and it is often very difficult to get out of it. Um, this is an interesting argument that your book talks about too, about language. And functionalists would say language is how we integrate people into society. So, using the functionalist argument, we would say that speaking anything other than English in the United States is a dysfunction because we have to share language in order to make sure that we're all socialized in the same way. And oftentimes, that is the framework that the English language debate is resting on. To say that everybody in this country must speak English is saying basically you must acquiesce your native language perhaps in order to become part of the society fully. Um, and that's very it's very ethnocentric to think of that, think of language in that way. And of course, multiculturalism really respects those cultural differences as opposed to trying to subvert them. Um, and it's the idea of the melting pot, right? So that I know somebody in our class has speaks three languages, And I'm sure that individual's life has been enriched by being able to immerse themselves in three different cultural spaces and not necessarily at the same time. And you know, multiculturalism from a functionalist point of view is that it's positively functional, meaning that it allows a new culture to be created in essence. Excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and let you read this part of the book. This is in there about rape culture, and it is just a cultural climate whereby individuals or the masses allow rape to persist. Um, and there's a legislative judicial culture that has been in play that oftentimes will not protect a victim of rape in the ways that they should. Um, and the laws are not designed necessarily to provide assistance for those individuals. And video games, films, music, pornography, all of that sexualize women where, they want it, they like it. Blurred Lines is a really good example that I've used in the past to kind of look at how rape culture is transmitted through popular culture. And, the victim blaming. In other words, she deserved it. She was in the wrong place, or in the wrong place at the wrong time. Um, that maybe she led them on. All of those arguments trying to detract from the act of violence against another person. Global culture is really taken off. It's spreading across the world. McDonald's all over the place. Music, films. Bollywood is a good example of how global culture is coming to the United States and around the world. A lot of people uh, are aficionados of movies made in India. Um, glo- Localization is when we use our local culture to really absorb all of the stuff that comes into us. Um, and we're still willing, though, to say, you know what, I don't think that that's really in line with the way our community or our social group wants to act or wants to appreciate. Um, and it really compartmentalizes the differences that as being different, but that difference is celebrated. So Oakland, I think, is a really, really good example of globalization. In that there is so much going on in that city that is positive um, in 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 terms of celebrating the rich heritage of all the ethnic groups that make up that city. And there's a celebration of it. I think it's just a great example of globalization and globalization. That is where people just want to take over the world. Some people have uh, blamed or um, said that the United States is an imperialistic nation because they want to see all of their power, their influence, and their profits grow throughout the world. So I think when there's examples given of globalization, the United States is probably at the top of the list. That's it, guys. Sorry that one went on a bit longer than the others. I just wanted to be able to get through it. Have a great night, and we will talk soon. Take care.